Hi, everyone. It's another conversation with Fred Oduye and Rick Lawrence, Executive Director of Vibrant Faith. Fred is the founder of Reachable Reconciliation and works with churches and cohorts and individuals all the time to help bring reconciliation where it's most needed. And we're going to have another conversation today about the building blocks of reconciling relationships. I can't think of anything more important and in a culture that now is full of enemies, Fred. I mean, yeah. I think it's a legit way to describe our current culture. It's a culture of enemies. You don't have to look far at all. If you want to make a new enemy today, just go on like a site like Nextdoor, which is for neighborhoods. Just post something innocuous on Nextdoor. You'll find like 3 or 4 comments down, someone will take issue with something you said. Absolutely. And now you got a new enemy. It's just everywhere. So I can't think of anything that's more important for us as ministry leaders, as people advancing the kingdom of God, than to think more deeply and more practically about how to bring reconciling relationships into this. So just as we get rolling here, I just wanted to remind everyone about the 5 R's that Fred has come up with to help this process. Those 5 R's kind of encompass the reconciling process. So that's reactions, reflection, repairs, reaching, and relationship. So this isn't a linear path. These things they work together like threads, but we're trying to poke at each one and highlight something from each one of these areas. And today we want to look at Fred's insight that transparency can close relational gaps. So Fred, first of all, let's figure out what we're talking about when we talk about transparency. How do you define that?
Yeah, I think people have a difficult time being transparent, right? And what we don't realize is the more honest, about who you are and what you believe, the more transparent that you will become to the other person, right? Transparency has a funny way of disarming the historical blocks that people have between other people, right? And however you got those blocks, whether it's from information, whether it's from your neighborhood or your community, your family, those blocks are within all of us, right? So they transcend race and color and all of us have blocks. Something wants to block us from being in connection with someone else. And so transparency becomes difficult. And the funny thing is the societal trend is to actually do the exact opposite. So if I say less, or if I show less, or if I stay more reserved, then it's almost as if I get to keep a badge of wisdom, by doing so. Because in doing that, I'm allowing the other person to show their cards while I'm strategically limiting my transparency. And that's
Fred, what impact does that have when you do that?
Well, it has a reverse impact when you do that. So it's not an impact of building relationship. It's an impact of keeping a divide, right? And that's actually not how God works. When I think of the relationship with God and Moses, I mean, I can hear him saying, I am that I am, right? And so it's really about being who you are. God's trying to show Moses, this is who I am, right? And so in like manner, if we could do a better job at being who we really are, then that helps us so that we can be enough for what the other person needs. But if we keep ourselves reserved, then we're actually not being transparent enough, and we're missing the connection that we could have with someone else. So that's why that relationship with God and Moses was so rich. They were friends. You know what I mean, Rick? They were real friends. They were intimate friends. They loved one another.
So I hear what you're saying is it's like the difference between thinking in a strategic way that supports your own mission and goals,
Yeah.
as opposed to behaving in a relational way that, so that first way is like a performance almost.
Yeah.
You're playing some kind of game
Yeah, absolutely.
in the relationship. And how could that create the environment for reconciliation and intimacy? It can't, because somebody is playing a game
Yeah.
in that situation. So I get what you're saying about it has to be the relationship. You've talked about the relationship, not the role.
Yeah.
Before.
And then to your point, when you mention a game, you're actually not winning the game, you're losing the game.
Yes.
You do that.
It's so good. So this relationship versus the role thing, you were telling me before about a story where you saw this lived out in the part of your life that's about coaching soccer. Could you tell that story again?
Sure. It's really about connecting to the relationship versus trying to preserve the role that we're in, if you will. I had a soccer game. I was coaching. Really intense game, really physical, and I mean the other team was getting fouls throughout the entire, getting cards, yellow cards, all over the place. So anyway, we won the game, of course. and so at the end of the game is over. And one of the players from the other team walks over to one of my best players and just punches her in the side, right? So mama is up in the stands along with the rest of the parents, and she just goes nuts. And so she starts, complaining and yelling to the refs. And then our other parents start doing the same. Well, then the parents from the other side now want to protect what the other kid has done. And so in the stands, they're just yelling. I mean, going back and forth. And just so we know it's not a color thing, this was an all white setting, right? And I mean, they're just going at it, boom, bang, boom, yelling. And so instead of me engaging in that, I went to my player and I asked the player, what happened? And she told me. And I wanted to look at her countenance to make sure she was okay. And I said, are you all right? And she smiled and she said, I'm fine. And that was enough for me to know that she was fine. So I'm going to allow the refs to try to intervene. Well, the referees weren't helping, Rick. I mean, they're yelling back up at the parents, stop, no, stop, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, that's terrible on how you're handling it. And then the other coach is getting involved. So I'm watching all this noise, and my team and myself peacefully just walk away and leave that behind. Well, after I grabbed all my stuff, everybody had left the field. Everybody, with the exception of the referees and myself. They happened to be congregating right next to my truck, discussing what took place. And so when I got there, I said, hey, maybe that could have been handled differently, because I said, my parents don't get rowdy. They're not ones who try to coach from the sidelines, or they're really just silent, they're very supportive parents. And for a situation like that was really out of their norm. And so, the lead referee, which would have been the center ref, said, yeah, but there was no reason, for either side to start going back and forth and I said, well, I understand what you're saying, but in your role, which is what you're asking me about, that in your role, you're envisioning it as a referee. I said, and I could, as a coach, I could have joined in like the other coach and just jumped in and all the banter that was going back and forth.
Because of your role as a coach.
Because of my role as a coach. So, but it was about the kid. So I went to the kid and asked, are you okay? And I said, and what I'm asking you is, if you come outside of your role and now take a look at it as a parent, what if you were a parent in the stands and it was your child that got punched in the side for no reason? I said, there'd be a reaction, right? And I said, and that's actually what happened. I said, so just have a better understanding of the relation, how we're fracturing the relationships that kids could have had in a better environment, and the relationship of the parent and the child versus your role as a ref, and even in that, how does your role as a ref build relationship or solve divide or, fix, repair, all those words, right? How do we resolve that and reconcile the situation through relationship, not through negative energy?
And so, and you really, what you're saying to wrap this up is that transparency is very much tied to an intentionality around how you're engaging others out. Instead of your role, you're engaging them relationally. So that if you had chosen in that situation, Fred, to engage through your role, it would have just added kindling to the fire. It would have just made it even hotter. And then it would have been hot with the referees. And we don't know what would have happened if you hadn't changed or hadn't brought your what Edwin Friedman calls your non-anxious presence
Yeah,
in this situation, where the focus then became the heart rather than the role, really.
that's the transparency, right? How do
Yeah.
we become transparent from the heart? And that's what I was trying to get the referees to reflect on. Let's be transparent from the heart and not from the role, right?
Yeah, and going back to how we started this conversation, this is exactly the kind of diffusing conversation that has to happen in a culture full of enemies right now. And so for those of you who are watching this, if these kinds of conflicts and tensions seem familiar to you, and I can't imagine they wouldn't, I just want to invite you to invite Fred into your situation, whatever it is, because Fred can help you walk through these. They're not really steps, they're disciplines, they're practices that will help bring a reconciling environment and help diffuse. Just think about how things could be different in your church culture, your organizational culture, if the fire wasn't getting hotter, it was getting less. Absolutely. Making it possible for you to have a real conversation, a real connection. So there's ways for you to get involved with what Fred's doing. Just look below this video and you'll find them. We'll see you again for the next conversation. Thanks, Fred.
Thank you, Rick.